Welcome to the Sinical Magazine podcast. My name is Danny Stygion, and I'm the publisher of Sinical and Subspace Magazine. This is episode number 22, and today's guest is Domina Irene Boss. She's been featured on the podcast before, and several years ago, I photographed her for an issue of Subspace Magazine. She is highly regarded in the femdom scene by other dominatrices and submissives, and it was an honor to interview her again for the podcast. Anyway, let's get to the interview. Hello, Irene Boss. How are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I don't know if you could hear, but it's raining in Texas. So if you hear stuff in the background, that's what that is.
So at least you don't have a hurricane. We had to move this podcast because of that. So at least it's just rain now.
Yes, hopefully no more.
And I remember when you had your
hurricanes.
Sinical ball, one of them, you had to move that too because of a hurricane.
Yeah, the weather in Texas could be a little crazy sometimes.
Yeah. So today the weather cooperates with us enough to do this.
Yes.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
For our listeners who don't know who you are or who haven't listened to the previous interview, can you reintroduce yourself?
My name is Domina Irene Boss. I've been a professional dom since 1994. So I've been in this world for over 30 years and I've seen a lot of trends. I got in before the internet began, but now I welcome the internet as most of us do. So I became a dom back when there was VHS and through DVD, and now everything is pretty much online as far as media content goes. But as far as a professional practice, I have been practicing in a studio and traveling since the mid-90s. And I'm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And I think the last time I saw you was when I was traveling to do photo shoots, and it was right before the pandemic. How do you think the scene has evolved since the pandemic?
I think the scene has changed a lot since the pandemic. I think the first thing that happened was an implosion and then an explosion. So I think a lot of people know I had a studio out west for quite a long time, for about 5 years, and made the decision to just keep my Pennsylvania studio going. So I feel that that decision was a good one for anyone who didn't get to visit the studio I had in California. I have honored it with 2 rooms here in Pittsburgh. So if you didn't get to come to California, well, you can come to Pittsburgh and experience the California studio here. So even the rubber floors and the mirrors have been moved and recreated here. But let's talk about the change. What happened when no one could travel and no one could get out of the house was, we were also told that we couldn't even practice for a while. I think a lot of businesses and studios just either closed or shut down permanently. Myself, for 3 months, I did not do any sessions. I felt civically, because of what other people were doing, it was the right move. And then when I could, of course, I was testing and masking and doing all the things that I was supposed to. But the biggest thing I heard from my people was, I can't get out of the house now. I'm working remote from home. I'm sorry, I can't see you. What are the alternatives? So I think a lot of people went online at that point. But I did not stay online. I went online for a few months, and now I'm pretty back entrenched in doing live scene play. But I have to say that since 2020, there's just not as much. And I think anyone who's been in this as long as I have and notices the trends would probably say the same thing. So I think we've seen a change. Is it going to swing back? I don't know. I also want to talk about the fact that not as many dungeons are around since 2020. I think there's just a few really good ones standing, but the idea of opening new ones, we haven't seen very many new ones open. And the replacements for the ones that did not stay open have not happened. So I think we're seeing a mass change in how we look at professional domination. I think the pandemic has affected our world, so to speak.
When you did online sessions or virtual sessions, what would you say is the biggest difference between a virtual session and a live session?
The energy exchange that you get from touch is not there. The reason I think that real time play will always be around is because of the power of that, what people get from that. Um, it's very healing. You can't get that across over a screen. It's an electricity that you feel from another person. So the human body is an electrical field, and I don't feel that these devices really accurately portray what you can get in a room with someone. You're actually feeling their breath, you're hearing their voice, and it's not through a device, it's through the air. Um, you're getting interacted with in all kinds of ways. So I don't feel that online play is a substitute. I feel it's a thing on its own. It's its own thing. And when I started looking at it that way, it meant something different to me, and I could become more fantasy oriented with it. Whereas what I do in a professional session, real time, is very structured. We negotiate a lot of things because I'm actually going to be touching people and physically doing things to them. It's important that you know what you're going to be doing in advance, that you're going to respect the limits and the boundaries. But with distance training, is what I like to call all play that's not real time, when you're in a room with someone or in a space or outside with someone personally, you can be a little more fantasy oriented because there's not the danger of actually hurting the person if you go too far physically. So I find that distance play is just a whole other thing. And I don't recommend it as a substitute for a real time scene. I recommend it as an addition or as its own thing.
That makes sense. Before the pandemic, were there many people that requested distance training?
If they had a very good reason to do so. For example, if physically unable to visit a studio, if desiring to spend time with a Dom who doesn't have a facility that's accessible. Sometimes age, people get into their late 80s and early 90s, and they still have this desire to at least be part of BDSM somehow. Um, People in other countries that there's no access to a studio. So there were a variety of reasons in the past why people were more attracted to distance training. But with the pandemic, it was the only thing we could do for those few months. So I think distance training is something that's here to stay, but I wouldn't call it something to substitute the real thing with.
Right. And when
Yeah.
you are preparing for a live session, how do you have like a ritual or something that you do to kind of get in the right headspace before the session?
Yes, if it's a longer session, that process takes more time. What I do with every session, though, is I like to draw because I have an art background. So I take a piece of paper and a clipboard and I draw a map. And this map is what I'm going to do, what I'm going to use, where I'm going to go. I might only do 80% of the map, but it's important for me to have it because you never want to run out of things. You always want to feel like you're being spontaneous. And this way, I'm respecting everything that can be done, but there's that element of the person not knowing what order things are going to happen in. But I know that I'm fishing in a lake and there's fish, so I can go where I need to go and get those high moments. And I can also interject if I'm with a person that enjoys a little bit of humiliation, making them do the things that they don't really want to do, but those things spark their submissiveness. So I think depending on the session determines how much time I will spend drawing this, but it's worked very well over the years. So it often has arrows on it and lines, and sometimes it's more than a page. And it wouldn't make any sense to anybody looking at it but me. but it's kind of like, I guess you'd call it a security blanket. And I'm not looking at a phone, I'm looking at a piece of paper, and this piece of paper doesn't have any personal details. It's just gibberish that I understand. But it's a great way to stay organized. Instead of words, it's drawing.
That's pretty
So
cool.
this
So
is
you,
what I've done in the last few years. So if it's a 2-hour session, obviously I don't spend as much time on it. But if it's like a 24-hour session, I might spend an hour working on that. Also, getting the studio ready is how I get ready to play. I get ideas as I get the studio ready.
so you kind of have a roadmap, but if stuff comes up and you want to change directions, you're able to do that.
Oh, yes, I'm not real regimented with it since I'm a yogi. I practice yoga every day. Um, I like to be somewhat flexible in a scene. For example, if someone really wants something and we can both tell it's not working, it's okay to change direction. Like how I use safe words is very different. I don't have a safe word that can stop the session. There's no way to stop the session. So the session can change and it can continue. But I tell people that there's no way to automatically leave. Once you're here, your clothes are locked up, usually downstairs, and the person is divorced from their belongings. So they become another person. They become a person without their stuff. And it's called intake. So once that happens, hopefully, there's a certain amount of freedom that sets in place after the collar is locked on, if that's the kind of scene it is. And most of the scenes I do these days are more on the intense side. I think what I'm starting to crave intensity again, which is interesting. That's part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast is I've seen a change in what people have been asking for in the last year.
What are some of the things that people have been requesting more in the past year?
The more extreme forms of play have become in vogue here again. The play piercing, the whipping. Of course, I make sure that there can be marks, but there's ways to throw whips. It doesn't have to be extreme. You can do light whipping and be sensual with it. But the harsher forms of play, and I think it's because we've gotten past that fear of getting sick, going everywhere, so we're starting to dive back in with a frenzy. So I've been doing long sessions, like 24-hour sessions, more than I had in the last few years. And what's very popular right now is a prisoner session I offer to people who have been here before. Within that 3-hour period, there's going to be an hour of abandonment. And that's up to me to decide. It could be in a cell, it could be in a cage, it could be on a table. But there's usually electrics involved, and they're usually set so the person can't fall asleep or take a nap. And of course, the things that are addressed are mutually agreed upon. It's not just whatever I want to do, but it's what we both want to do. So what I do is attract people who share my interests. That way they don't feel like I'm following a script. And I don't feel like I'm being a service top. It is harder to develop people this way, but it's a lot more satisfying.
How does a 24-hour session go?
Everyone is different with regards to that. I haven't met an individual who can play for 24 hours straight. The longest I've ever played is 16 hours. The person lasted 15 and a half. And the reason they got such a long session is they had had knee surgery and had been unable to play for so long. So they figured they would just jump back in. Without knowing 16 hours probably wasn't a great idea. There were 32 bondage positions in that time period. That's a lot. And also being careful of their knee, which was still healing. So that was a real challenge for me to pull that one off. And I was pretty tired after that one for a few days. So mostly when I do a 24-hour, there is a break period or several where I will lock my prisoner away, say in the slave apartment on the 3rd floor, and I come back to interact with them. They don't know when I'm coming back, but they can hear the high heel shoes. And I'll say something like, when you hear those heels, get to the top of the stairs, because it's going to take a little while. Make sure you are in this position, facing the door, ready to go. It's yes, ma'am. And the same thing in the morning. I'll give them little cues about what could possibly happen, but I don't tell them everything. Some people like to go out and spend some time in the city doing various things, whether or not they wear things underneath their clothing. is decided upon mutually. Sometimes it's just to get a break off campus, and sometimes it's to extend the play. Sometimes it's a museum or an art gallery or an adult party. Sometimes it's a restaurant or a coffee house. Just depends. And always respect is shown to society at large. So when I do these light public spectacles, if it's not at an adult themed place, the only people who are aware of what's going on are myself and my subject. But that in and of itself is exciting. So it just depends on the person and what we've decided to do. There's no stock example. I can talk about the last one I did if you're curious.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Okay. So this person and I have done 24-hour sessions before, and they're primarily a bondage enthusiast. So that's a lot of fun for me because I like to do that. And they are slight, meaning that they're height weight proportionate. So I can do the Chinese finger puzzle cage. I can do the rope bondage suspension. I can do the crazy things that a person can handle who is height weight proportionate. Now, for someone who's not, I do have devices and methods so I can do things with them safely, but I'm not stressing them to the point where they're feeling bad because they can't take what I'm doing, due to their body. So I think it's important to respect the person you're with in terms of what they can handle. Unless you negotiate that they're going to fail, that's something else. So this particular person and I enjoy playing for long periods in certain types of bondage positions, like the Houdini chair. He can't flip it over. The base is wider than the seat on that. Sensory deprivation. Several sessions like that. Then we went out and took a break, and we were just regular people, and he wanted to go eat something. So we went and did that. And then we came back and he had 2 more sessions. He had one in the evening and one in the morning before he departed. And the one in the morning was super intense. It was on the Berkeley horse. There was a lot of intense CBT and whipping at the end of that because I wanted to give him a really intense send-off. I felt that he needed that. And this is someone who's going through some changes in life, who needs some intensity just to get away from the day-to-day. And I think sometimes in life, we reach milestones, we reach change of job, change of family. For example, kids leave home. All of a sudden you're a new person because who you're living with has changed. So I see a lot of people who want long sessions who are in a change of life, and the session is almost like a venture quest or a vacation or a way to challenge oneself to go back to life and have that memory. So oftentimes there's photographs, small video clips, little mementos, private things that are shared to enjoy that memory. So usually with these long things, I do these with people maybe once a year, though I do see someone who likes to fly in on a lark and do an overnight with very little notice, but I've seen that person a lot, so it's easy for me. But for a new scene, brand new person, I wouldn't even consider doing a 24-hour. I would start with a 2-hour and make sure that they're simpatico with the personalities, and then try something longer, maybe then to 4 hours. So it's not something I'd recommend for everyone, but it is a really nice thing to do if you can get the time away to change your energy. There's also the aspect of affordability. How much playtime is involved affects the tribute, and that is also negotiated. So there's no stock answer for how much it is or how much playtime there is, because that depends on myself and the person. Though I can honestly say I can manage with my stamina and experience to give someone enough. So I've never had anyone say you weren't hard enough on me. Now, I have had some years go by where people look back on the session and they feel it wasn't hard enough. And then I remind them, I'm going, remember these emails that we exchanged? You told me that this was hard enough. So I find it interesting how when we look back on play, it changes. It seems like it was light when it wasn't at the time. And sometimes people feel that the scene was too harsh, but that's unusual. It's very rare that I don't have simpatico, especially with the longer scenes, because when you give someone a break, you have time to regroup and figure out the rest of it if you have to change course. So since I'm a problem solving type personality, I like the longer sessions because there's always something to fix. It's like being an engineer. There's something that's going to go wrong and you're going to fix it. And that's exciting to me.
I know you mentioned bondage, but what are some of your other favorite play styles that you enjoy?
Role play is a lot of fun, especially if you can roll with it for a while in terms of having an idea that sets the tone for the energy of the session. For example, if someone wants something really harsh, a revenge type idea often works best, something that would really actually piss the dom off can give the fire and energy to carry that through. So if someone, for example, tells me they're a brat, oh, I'm going to run with that. You know, those role plays are always a lot of fun, but the brat role play is going to make both parties extremely tired. So you have to think about what comes after the session as well when thinking of doing something that's long. I also enjoy playing a sadistic role just as an extreme mistress. I like doing Nurse Ratched, which is a type of sadistic nurse, and I push that one pretty far. So I enjoy doing extreme medical play with people who are interested in that. I feel that everyone likes to try a little bit of everything at some point. So most of the people I've played with say they're not even into cross dressing. They've tried it just because they want to get a point of reference for it. It doesn't mean they need to do it again or even like it. And it can be hard delivering such a session because I'm doing the session knowing, okay, this is not this person's main kink, but they're experimenting. But in that way, since it's their first time trying something, it becomes new for me again, too. So it's a way to stay fresh, I think, offering different styles of domination. I also do female supremacy OWK type sessions, which are consensual, non-consensual. And those are very intense. And most of the people who want those haven't even visited the OWK. So I think it's just to get a flavor. But since there are artifacts from that place here, there are collars and equipment and costumes and things, that there is a reality. And I visited there many times. I can bring them that here.
Have you had or what happens when a slave tries something they haven't tried before and they don't like it? Like
Well, we
nipple
talked
piercing,
about it
for example.
before. Go ahead.
Or like nipple piercing, for example.
Well, nipple piercing's an interesting one because if you use really, really tiny needles like spinal surgery needles, they're pretty expensive. And of course, they're one use disposable. If you get a ton of them, you can get the cost down. But if you just want to buy 10, I mean, they're $10 each or probably more with inflation. What I find with nipple piercing is if you go slow and you do nipple play prior, then you can tease a person into this activity quite easily. Using a blindfold can be also useful. For example, the visual of it. If I want to scare the hell out of someone, I'm going to make them watch. I'm going to incline them. They're going to watch what I'm doing. They're going to see everything. If they're new to it and they're a little nervous about it, but they really want to do it, sometimes I'll blindfold them or do sensory deprivation. I'll provide the experience. I'll take the blindfold off and I'm like, look, it's in. And they're like, I didn't even feel that. So it depends on the delivery. Also, how you take the needles out. If you're really rough with it, I'm not. Even if I'm asked to be, I will not. I don't even draw blood most of the time when I do play piercing, and that's any area of the body. Now, there's some areas that are more vascular than others. There's some things that you just should not do. If someone wants to pursue a family life, it's not a good idea to stick spinal surgery needles through their balls. Or do scrotal infusion or any of those crazy things. It's just common sense. And even in the hospital, people can get things wrong with them with sterile procedures. So I'm always very careful about educating someone for aftercare in the event, say, we're getting off the subject of piercing, but it's related. If somebody wants like cath play or scrotal infusion or things like that, something can go wrong. And then you're getting into RAC, which is risk aware consensual kink. You're not even in the regular realm of BDSM. You've gone beyond it. So people like me, you know, we own autoclaves, we own iodine, we know how to create a sterile field. You have to, because you have to keep people safe, but you also want to give them that edge that they crave. So I guess getting back to the play piercing subject, somebody's going to want to do something for me to really want to get into it with them. If it's too much hemming and hawing or too much, I want you to force me, well, that's probably not going to work, because the whole force thing is also an illusion. Nobody's really forced by the dominatrix to do anything. If you think about it, it's an illusion, and giving them that illusion is the rub. So it's often helpful to have other things that are related to scare the person with as well. And I've also done scenes where I've never even done the thing that the person wanted me to do because it would have made no sense or have been too scary. But there's a thing called suspension of disbelief. So if you're good in theater or in acting, and I have some background with that, you know, I've actually gotten people to believe that I'm going to burn them when I didn't even do it. I didn't even brand them. So the threat of something is very popular in scene play. Whether it's going to happen is another thing. So I think needles, they're a scary thing. Being threatened with needles or actually doing them has to be decided. Most of the time I do actually do it, but I'm with people that I know can take it. I hope this answers some of the question and also gives some more information about edgier forms of play.
Yes, it did. As
Okay.
as far as recurring people that see you, do you find that a submissive wants to explore new things, or kind of like the same kinks over and over, or is it just depends on the individual?
Some people are looking for a relationship with the dom, and in that, getting to know her over time, becoming more interested in the things that she offers that she enjoys. I would have to say that's submissive. Some people are interested in trying a bunch of kinky things. So it's not about serving the dom, but it's about the activities themselves. That would be a kinkster. By the way, there's nothing right or wrong with any of these things. This is just the reality since the internet. You know, then we have masochists, people who want to experience intense sensation for the feelings they get from those intense sensations being provided, the endorphins that get released. So I primarily play with those groups. The bondage people, it's a little bit of serving sometimes, but it's mostly being a taker of sensations, but not necessarily painful ones. So sometimes a person can be one of these things or many of these things. Then we can get into fetishism as well. So a lot of this is connected. So it's hard to talk about some of these things without bringing up the others.
Right, that makes sense, and that's a good way
Yeah.
of explaining it.
Yeah.
Do you have any current favorite toys in the dungeon?
I really love doing electro play. It's something that I have been doing since the very beginning. I was unusual when I began as a dom because I kind of embraced the things that nobody else was embracing, like wearing colorful rubber and doing electricity and thinking outside the box. So I still love doing creative electrical play, especially for people who can't have marks. You can put electrical pads on someone's body, on the parts of their body that they want to have corporal play upon, and make noise or crack the whip right at the microphone on the electrical box and give them a sensation, which is really kind of cool. And then you take those pads off and there's no marks. So I've discovered ways to use electricity that's different. I was using Nova Pro mind machines for quite a long time. I've gotten away from that because I've gotten more into connecting with people while they're here, which means eye contact, verbalizations, being able to see their face. But if someone requested it, I would pull it out and do it. But it's probably been about 5 years since I've even used a mind machine.
What
So
does that
mostly
do?
the electrical play. What does it do? It induces a hypnotic state. It relaxes a person who might have tunnel thinking. For example, a person with racing thoughts or who's having trouble relaxing, winding down, getting into the session. It's a good way to do one of those scary things instead of wearing a hood or a blindfold and not knowing what's going on. So it's a pair of glasses with sensors over the eyelids and a headset. It attaches to a synthesizer. You can program it. And there's different names for these: Nova Pro, Mind Machine. Things develop as fads. We get this, for example, remember the milking machines were all the rage for a while, and that happened after the mind machines. I think that the electro boxes are always going to be interesting for people because the programs can be changed and used for different things, but also just to explore a different type of sensation. And when people are new to electrical play, the first thing they think is something negative. And then I'm like, no, wait a minute. This can feel like you're being tapped. You can feel things in other parts of your body. It's a way to experience strap-on play without doing all the prep, because you can do electro insertables and not have to go through all of that and still get some pretty interesting sensations. So I've always been very positive about it, but there's some forms of electro play I don't offer. I don't offer stun guns. I've done cattle prods on occasion with people who have experience with them. I don't use tasers or field phones, nor would I do this play with someone who physically couldn't handle it. A person has to impress me that they're physically healthy enough to do these things. And even then, you have to keep an eye on a person. Things can go wrong. So I'm a big fan of starting low and going up higher, though I do see some people, their insistence is upon very extreme electro, being bound, being hit in the balls with a cattle prod. This is extreme play. Not very many people are going to want to do that. The reason I'm talking about it, well, sometimes it's fun to hear something being talked about or watch something, but it doesn't necessarily mean you want to do it. But
Right.
there's somebody out there who does. And maybe it's a good threat. But there are some things I do that are very rare, and then there are others I do more of. So the milder electrical play is something I do in almost all my scenes. But if I was asked to not do electricity, does that upset me? No, it's okay. It's good for me to do other things too. So I'd have to say lately it's been more electro play and whipping. Whipping has come back. For a few years there wasn't very much of it. All of a sudden now I'm getting interest again. And I find that, that's a change. So part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast was to talk about the fact that the extreme play seems to be making an appearance again.
What are some of the key pieces of furniture that you think belong in every dungeon?
A long time ago, when I was doing DomCon regularly, I would bring some pieces with me. And I was told that my traveling dungeon was actually nicer than some of the dungeons that people had been in that were, brick and mortar. I feel that you need a standing piece, a bench, a table, and then something for suspension. So when I work outside of my studio, when I travel to play, I make sure that I have at least 4 structural pieces. I don't always use them. Sometimes I'll just use one, but it's just good to have them because they will end up getting used at some point. So here in Pittsburgh right now, I have 8 theme rooms. Do I use them all the time? No. But one of the nice things about having this many playrooms is you can close them down and actually they sit, they get clean. You know, you have time to take someone into a space they've never seen before. And I like to play on the different floors of my studio. So I have a room down in the basement called where no one can hear the screams. And that's a great place to take someone who's very loud. And they can scream with abandon, knowing they don't have to muffle it. So, the structural pieces in the rooms that are the favorites, things that you won't find in other places, like the Berkeley horse is very popular, the rotating table from Honor, the tilting electric stretching cross. There's a few chairs that go up and back here. There's a circlotron spinal surgery table. I don't do surgery on the table. I just position people on it and move it around. But you don't need these really crazy bells and whistles unless you're doing what I do. But I think foundationally, it's good to have at least 4 pieces if you're a bondage top. If you're not a bondage top, then this is irrelevant. Being a bondage top, I like to make sure that I am prepared.
And back to traveling for a moment. What are some other items that would go in your travel BDSM kit besides the furniture?
Usually the electrodes that attach to the boxes, I do a bit of that play. I bring a separate bag of corporal gear, everything from whips, tawses, rulers, quirts, crops, paddles, all corporal gear, usually has its own bag. I rarely play with people who dress anymore who do not have their own things, but they don't have bondage ballet boots. Most people don't. So I'm usually bringing those. Corsets for men, for example, stockings that fit men. They're hard to find. But once you do, then, it's great. So what I bring does determine who I'm playing with. It's rare that I'll make a decision to see someone after I've arrived somewhere. So when I travel, sessions are arranged usually weeks and months in advance. So I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to pack, but I also make sure the space has things that are important for me. So I'm not having to drag furniture and build it on site. I've done that. It's hard, but I prefer not to. I prefer not to use hotels unless the scene is something that makes sense there, because it's hard to change the atmosphere and ambience of a hotel room. You can do a really nice role play, though, if you're into something that works with that. One of the funnest movies I ever made, for example, and I wasn't even in it, it was the idea of the Dom being a hotel manager and barging in on these women that were being too loud, and then she ends up getting sucked into the scene. So I think you can use hotels for a good purpose, but mostly BDSM is too loud. So I prefer to use dungeon space only these days. It's rare that I'll consider a hotel room or a private residence, though I do play in private residence where I feel it works and it makes sense. But I think when you have to overcome the atmosphere of the place, you have a hard time getting into the scene. So I think atmosphere is really important for scene play.
I wanted to get your quick thoughts on several movies and TV shows with a fetish or
Absolutely.
BDSM theme. So I'm going to mention some titles, and
Okay.
you can give me your thoughts. So some of these come up a lot, and our social media platforms when we post about favorite movies and TV shows. The first one is Secretary.
I really enjoyed this movie. It didn't bother me at all that it was male dom fem sub. And I feel when people are into BDSM, they can put themselves in these roles interchangeably anyway. For example, a lot of men watch lesbian BDSM porn and put themselves in the roles of the women. It's very common. So I thought they chose the actors well. I thought BDSM was portrayed reverently and respectfully in terms of what it actually is. I liked the humorous aspect of it, the human aspect of it. I didn't feel the film used BDSM salaciously. I felt that it was probably one of the better films made portraying this lifestyle in a realistic manner. There was some fanciful things about it. Don't get me wrong. There was some fanciful moments in it, but the realities of what people go through psychologically, how alone they feel when no one understands them, um, and when they find that anchor, that person. So BDSM relationships are different than vanilla relationships. All relationships have dynamics, but BDSM relationships can be harder. They often are fraught with more moods, feelings, drama, what have you, because you get to know people so quickly in BDSM. It's hard to slow down. So they can almost also end badly. And what I liked about Secretary is it had a beautiful ending.
Yes, it did.
Not like 9.5 weeks, which ended in nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
This next one's pretty popular, and I think has a divided audience, and it's 50 Shades of Grey.
I was disappointed in the bondage and, finger bondage. Come on, I realized they had to get past the censors. And also I just felt like, talking about censors, we decided we weren't going to talk about it, but here we are, it's coming up. I think the mass exodus of trying to control the adult business, right? Because of some of the bad things that have happened, have obviously filtered down to the mainstream media. We've seen that happen now. So there's almost a fear of portraying BDSM. Look at how Secretary was made, when it was made, what was accepted. Look at 50 Shades of Grey, how it was made, what was accepted. Very different.
Yeah.
It almost looked to me as if they were afraid to push the envelope. And perhaps they were. So I'd have to say the way it portrayed BDSM, I don't feel BDSM is a mental illness, and it has since been removed from the DSVM. It is no longer even listed as such, and paraphilias are such. They're not listed as, well, there's something wrong with this person. They like to be whipped. No. So I feel that there's a little bit of a negative connotation with that series of books and that film, and also the fact that the books were written by someone who's not really even a BDSM person, but someone who has BDSM fantasies. It doesn't really represent the culture of BDSM as a whole realistically, but it is a view.
Right.
So I think it needs to be looked at in that way. And do I think the film was bad? Well, I'm a person that's been practicing this for a pretty long time, so I'm going to notice if something looks awkward or contrived, or if people don't look comfortable. So let's just say with the film Secretary, I felt like people were consulted who know and understand what this is. For example, in HBO Billions, people were consulted who understand the scene and care about it and want to represent it in a way that supports it, not, oh, there's something wrong with people because they're into this. And I know there's a certain romantic view of being swept off your feet, a damsel in distress, or a dude in distress for that matter. But to portray the dom as someone who has problems or issues, I don't know, it's kind of making a judgment.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
You mentioned Billions. Have you seen Bonding on Netflix?
I have, and I think that's a very fun and light way to look at the pro BDSM world. It's not a realistic way, but I like the casting and the way it moves, the editing of it. I have some theater film background, so I look at things like lighting, music, dialect, acting, directing. I look at all of that. So it's comedy. And BDSM is fun to use in comedy, but it's good to remember that it is comedy, that it's not realistic. And, there's this whole non-truth about what people even make in BDSM anymore. I mean, I don't like bringing up OnlyFans, but, half the time you hear people making millions of dollars on OnlyFans. It's not even true. So I think that sometimes films have a way of perpetuating this get rich quick scheme with BDSM or the adult business, which isn't real. You have to work hard in the adult business like any business. I mean, look at how hard you work. You're in the adult business.
Right.
And it doesn't just flow in. I mean, you have to make effort. And I think sometimes the comedy shows portray BDSM in such a way that it's easy when it isn't.
No, it's definitely not easy.
No.
And the last film I wanted to mention is Matériel.
That's something I saw a really long time ago. It's a story of a dominatrix in France, pre-internet, definitely. In fact, I think it might have even been made in the 60s or 70s. Not sure about that. French actors, but it's more of a realistic representation of a relationship and of a dominatrix and what a dominatrix's life is like, and not just the session fantasy aspect, but the psychological struggle behind it and what it's like to live this lifestyle.
Actually, I haven't seen that one yet, so I need
Now
to
you're
make sure I
probably going
check
to
it
see
out.
it.
Right.
I hope you do.
And let's see, I have a few more questions. What social media platforms do you use to promote on currently?
Well, we still have Twitter. Believe it or not, I use Facebook. FetLife is one that has served me well, especially with regards to all of the changes. I mean, FetLife does obviously have, they have people monitoring the site to keep predators off of it and keep everyone safe. But FetLife is still really welcoming to edgy BDSM. I'm not saying BDSM that's so edgy that people are getting sick or dying or anything. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the stuff that we aren't allowed to show anymore on Clips for Sale and I Want Vids and Many Vids and, all of those platforms. And those really aren't social media sites, but it's worth mentioning because they do affect what we can show on our social media now. So I have found the internet is changing. It is becoming more conservative. I process my own website memberships and have for a very long time because I want to give people what they want to see. I don't want to be pussyfooting around and changing content every few years. And I went through it and it was horrible and I hated it. And I hated taking the things out of my videos that people really wanted to see. But that's where we were all at. It was like a mass panic. If you remember, the whole 2257 thing was also a mass panic. We all freaked out and then we had to scramble and figure out how we're going to deal with this. And that seems to happen every few years. But I don't think the adult business on the internet is ever going to go away. And I don't think whoever is elected is going to make it go away. Or, we're always going to have this. We're always going to have our adult play online. But I think it's going to change. If it all has to go over to the dark web, there's a problem with that because then there's no way to deal with the really dangerous people. They're not findable. I think it's smart to keep the adult business in the public eye with adults, obviously, not, letting people who shouldn't see it. But we're faced with this weird truth too. Do you know that a lot of the people who I've come into contact with knew about me before they should have? So I look at that and I think, do we need greater restrictions for people seeing things on the internet who should not be seeing them? Yes, but that shouldn't affect how we all see the internet. That's a very hard thing to do. And I think that's what we're struggling with now. And I do think that some websites had to go. If minors are practicing in the adult field, well, that's not legal. So I feel, as someone who represents BDSM, And I've always tried my best to cross my T's and dot my I's and not promote things that I should not be. But let's face it, BDSM is an edgy interest. So you can't sanitize it too much because then it's not BDSM anymore.
Right.
I've had people complain some of my videos, well, everyone has their clothes on. That's not exciting to me. I'm like, but they're being spanked. This is a spanking video. Not everyone needs to have their clothes off. So, not everyone has to be naked all the time. That's true. So here's the things that people want to see that the processors don't really want people to see anymore. This started happening in the DVD business back in the day. And then, of course, it affected the internet. You can't have cuffs on each body part. You got to have one arm free. Well, why? Well, because the person has to be able to get out. Well, then how does that make it exciting? No bondage and penetration. Well, that's what everybody wants to do. So I just found some of it silly. No broken skin. And then I saw all the red candle wax on everything because, they're trying to mimic broken skin by using red candle wax. They're putting makeup on people to look like cane stripes. You can tell.
Yeah.
So there's workarounds and ways around this. But I feel that things are getting a bit too sanitized and people are getting frustrated in certain countries. They've even tried to outlaw BDSM. It happens every few years in England. And then people go and do demonstrations on the grass in Parliament. Have you seen it? Have you seen it on the news, on the internet? It's kind of fascinating.
No,
So we get to the point where we could get all of this taken away from us. I don't think we're going to have all of it taken away from us. I think it is getting a little too sanitized, though. That's my own personal opinion from someone who's been in this for a long time. And I think it's just a backlash effect. And I think the pendulum does swing back. I do not think come November that if somebody wins the election, we're going to lose the adult business. And I don't think trans people are going to be put in concentration camps or any of that. I think the world probably will change slowly again, but that's just what we get. And in our country where we live, how the government feels about what we're doing and creates laws affects our lives. So I think it's important to talk about it and be realistic about it. I'm not a political person, by the way. I'm a bit of a religious person, but that doesn't really sneak into my practice. But it does make me sensitive about some things. So I just see things probably getting a little wilder once things change because that's what happens. And then they'll probably get more conservative again.
It's definitely going to be.
It's not really who the lawmakers are. It's how much time has passed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the next few years, it's going to be very interesting. So
it's already getting interesting. Things are changing now. So, I'm always happy to talk about this. I give a realistic opinion. I look at a lot of sources and I don't try to base what I say on my own personal thoughts, but unless I'm asked to, and then I will say in my personal opinion, but I look at everything around me and I look at different sources. I look at newspapers. Well, I read newspapers. I listen to the radio. I watch the news. I also watch news outlets on YouTube that say things that nobody can say on the major networks, but then those you have to watch too, because you have to wonder how real they are. So I think it's good to get our source information from a lot of places and not just one.
I agree with you on that. What is the best place for people to find you these days? And is there any upcoming events or projects that you want to mention?
I love email because I can stay organized and I can let a person contact me at any time they need to without fear of disturbing me. You can send an email to someone at 4:00 in the morning if you're having a thought and they won't see it until they open their thing. If they have their notifications shut off, obviously I do. And I don't mind having phone calls once I know there's a connection and there's compatible interest, then having a phone call can be great. But email is the best way for me to stay organized. And that's always on my website, which is pittsburghdominatrix.com. And Pittsburgh has a GH at the end of it. And then I have a members area that's domboss.com. Of course, I have Eclipse for Sale store. It's 5548. It's Boss Extreme and Friends. So I've been doing that website for a long time, but email is the best way. And my email address is pittsburghboss@gmail.com. I did do the Proton for a while, but there is a way to use Gmail as safely, to encrypt. So Proton, I think, was a phase, and it might stay, but it's cumbersome for me. It's a newer platform. It's always still in beta, and it's just frustrating because having to get a new phone, all of us have to do this practically every year or two. I just don't want to deal with too many apps. So I've never been a fan of people contacting me over social media to discuss BDSM. For one thing, I don't feel there's the privacy. And then if the person deletes their account or I lose mine, where does all that communication go? It's simply gone.
Right.
So I think having a safe email address is the best bet. And I counsel people, if you're into BDSM and you're trying to keep this private, do your best to keep it private. Erase your history. Have a separate email address. Don't use your work phone and your work computer. Be smart. I'm out. So for me, it's a little different. But I think it's important to cover tracks. We live in the age of no privacy. We think we have privacy, but we really don't have it anymore. But we can try to respect those around us and those who might know that we're interested in these things by being careful of how we make contact. That is, if we're trying not to get caught. And I don't engage with people who are trying to get caught, by the way, or people who want to involve a partner who doesn't know. I'm not going to get involved in the dynamics of someone's relationship and possibly ruin it, though I do play with couples on occasion. It's because both are consenting parties. So I'm one of those DOMs who's going to remind people to start being a little more careful about covering their tracks. And I came into this when there were pagers and there weren't even cell phones.
I remember those.
When you had to write a letter to a magazine and you had to wait 3 weeks to get a response. I remember those days. In fact, I kind of missed them because it was kind of romantic. I have to say, though, we have more communication now. And back then, everyone had to pretend to be a slave. Whether you were a slave or not, you had to pretend to be one. It's just how it was. And now we've got all these definitions and all these genders. So it's a lot more complicated now, but we do have a lot more communication and we have more education. So I keep myself organized by using email.
Yes, it's definitely a crazy world these days.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for talking to me for the podcast, and I appreciate you, Irene.
Oh, I appreciate you too, absolutely. And I'm supportive of all the kink communities and all of the lifestyles. I ran a party business for about 5 years, and we had everything from furries to spankos to bondage people, to people interested in transgenderism. I mean, you name it. It was a very good time for me to learn more about all of this. But the internet created the ability for us to learn more about each other. So I do think our world's going to be changing. I think we need to brace ourselves for that change and not being negative about it. The things that really matter for us as people will stand. But it's not a time for hatefulness or derision. It's a time for BDSM people to, I feel, be proud of what it is and that we've had. One of my main passions is BDSM education. I do that through my website. I used to do it by doing trade shows and, giving workshops, but I'm not doing that right now. But I do have a website, which does go back to the mid-90s, which is helpful for anyone who is interested in femdom BDSM and learning various techniques. And it's a 4-month membership and it's only $50. So I still feel it's a pretty good deal. And it has everything from films that are full fashioned and edited to fly on the wall to sessions to POV fantasies. It's all there. So I continue to offer this website to not as many people as I used to. It's a smaller group of people, but I like it, and it's a good way to start if you're new. Joining a Dom's website is a good way to start if you want to find out more about that person.
Make sure to list the site in the show notes.
Oh, thank you so much. And I've been following your magazines and projects for years. I love your photography. You photographed me. It's fabulous. Anybody out there who wants fetish photography and is looking for someone should certainly look you up, because you're one of the best out there. So have to say that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And maybe we'll get to do that again someday.
Yeah, I hope so.